a sharp metal needle pressed into the hairline, the unmistakable smell of burned hair. This was not a backroom punishment. It was Columbia Pictures engineering a product. The public worshipped Rita Hayworth as the love goddess, but the studio owned the modified image. Margarita Cansino had to be stripped down so an icon could be manufactured. When an empire physically reconstructs a human being for profit, who actually controls the person left behind? That question is the core of our investigation today. Rita Hayworth. How Columbia erased Margarita Cansino and built a screen icon. We expose the process so you can see exactly how the machine operates. You are watching Hollywood Dark Secrets. Long before Columbia Pictures put the name Rita Hayworth on posters, there was Margarita Carmen Cansino. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, into a family where dancing was not a weekend activity. It was the family trade. Her father, Eduardo Cansino, came from a Spanish dance background. Her mother, Volga Hayworth, had worked in show business too. In that house, a child did not simply learn steps. A child learned discipline, timing, posture, and silence. Margarita learned how to hold her body before she was old enough to decide what kind of life she wanted. She learned that applause could feed a family, and that adults could call pressure training when a child had no power to refuse. By the time most girls were still learning how to be awkward, Margarita was being taught how to perform like someone older. The difference matters. A child should be allowed to look like a child. Margarita was pushed toward the opposite. Her hair was darkened. Makeup was used to age her face. Her body was trained to move under adult eyes. The work demanded polish, not innocence. It demanded a smile, even when the room was wrong for someone her age. While she was still a young teenager, her father made her his dance partner in the act, known as the Dancing Cansinos. Because American venues were harder for a girl her age, the act crossed into Tijuana, where the rules were looser, and the rooms were built for tourists, gamblers, and men with money to spend. Those places were not designed to protect a child. They were designed to keep adults entertained. The floors were hard. The air was thick with smoke. The music ran late. People watched from tables with drinks in their hands. Margarita had to step into that world and make it look natural. That is one of the first important facts in the Rita Hayworth story. The public later saw glamour, but the training began in places where glamour was just a cover for work. Margarita did not walk into show business as a free young artist. She was pushed into it by family pressure, money pressure, and a father who controlled the act. The audience saw a young dancer with sharp timing and adult poise. They did not see the cost of making a girl look older than she was. Later accounts of her childhood describe deep harm inside that father-daughter arrangement. Some biographical accounts say, Eduardo crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed, and that Margarita carried that damage into adult life. The details are private, painful, and should not be used for shock. The point is not to turn her childhood into spectacle. The point is to understand what kind of training she received before Hollywood ever touched her. She learned that powerful men could decide where she went, what she wore, when she worked, and how much of herself she had to hide. Her mother, Volga, was present in that world, but presence did not equal protection. Margarita still worked. Margarita still danced. Margarita still had to grow up fast. A child in that position does not always have language for exploitation. She knows smaller things first. She knows when an adult is angry. She knows when the room expects a smile. She knows when silence is safer than protest. She knows that if the act fails, the family suffers. That kind of pressure can make a child feel responsible for adults who should have been responsible for her. This is where Margarita's screen stillness began. Later, cameras would love the way she could look distant and unreachable. Critics and fans would call it mystery. Men would call it seduction. But distance can come from somewhere colder than glamour. Sometimes a blank look is not a pose. Sometimes it is a way to leave the room without moving. Margarita learned how to let the body keep performing while the mind went quiet. Hollywood would later sell that distance as part of Rita Hayworth's magic. It rarely asked where the distance came from. By her teenage years, Margarita had already learned the lesson that shaped too much of her life. Men controlled the room. She adjusted. Men controlled the money. She worked. Men controlled the story. She stayed quiet. That training made her valuable to Hollywood because Hollywood was another room run by men. It had better lights, better costumes, better cameras, and cleaner paperwork. But the basic demand was familiar. Do what the powerful people need and make the result look beautiful. In 1937, Margarita married Edward Judson. She was 18. He was about 40. That age difference was not just a number. It shaped the whole arrangement. Judson was older, experienced, and practical. He understood promotion. He understood how to sell a woman to the industry. Margarita was young, wounded, and looking for a way out of her father's control. Marriage looked like an exit. It became another form of management. Judson did not simply become her husband. He became a handler. He studied her as material. He looked at her name, body, face, and career prospects, and saw what could be changed. He did not look at Margarita Cansino and say, the world should accept her as she was. He looked at her and saw a product that needed adjustment before it could move through the Hollywood system at a higher price. That was how the old studio business worked. It often dressed control as opportunity. A young woman could be told that a new name was good for her, a new hairline was good for her, a new diet was good for her, a new voice, a new walk, a new wardrobe, a new biography, all good for her. But the question underneath was always the same. Good for whom? Good for the person or good for the sale? The first major change was the name. Margarita Cansino became Rita Hayworth. The studio and Judson understood that Cansino marked her as Spanish, ethnic, and too specific for the kind of mainstream American stardom they wanted. Hayworth came from her mother's side. It sounded more Anglo, easier for Hollywood to package, easier for audiences to accept without thinking too much about where she came from. Margarita became Rita. Cansino disappeared from the marquee. A whole family history was pushed behind a cleaner label. This was not a small detail. Names carry memory. Names carry language, family, country, and class. Hollywood knew that. That is why it changed names so often. A studio could take a person with a complicated background and make that person easier to sell by changing the sound of the name. Rita Hayworth was not born fully formed. She was edited. The edit began on paper before it moved to the skin. The name change also solved a problem Hollywood did not want to admit out loud. The studio wanted Rita to seem exotic enough to be exciting, but not so foreign that white American audiences felt distance from her. that balance was cold and deliberate. Keep the face. Keep the dance training. Keep the heat the publicity department could sell. But soften the surname. Remove the part that made her too clearly Spanish. Make her easier to place on a magazine cover, easier to introduce in a press release, easier to sell as an American dream. That is how erasure often works. It does not always announce itself as hatred. Sometimes it arrives as advice, a better name, a better look, a better chance. But every better moved her farther from Margarita. The studio did not ask what that cost her. It only asked whether the new version photographed well. Then came the hairline. Columbia wanted a different face. Rita had a low, natural hairline, and the studio believed a higher forehead would make her look more refined and less tied to the Latin parts that Hollywood wanted to soften. The method was electrolysis. It was slow, painful, and physical. A needle was inserted into hair follicles along the hairline. Electrical current damaged the follicle. The process had to be repeated over time. It was not a quick beauty treatment. It was a long, controlled alteration of her body. There was no glamour in that room. There was a chair. There was equipment. There was skin reacting. There was the smell of burned hair. There was pain that had to be endured because the camera wanted a different face. Session by session, the hairline moved. The old face was not erased in one dramatic moment. It was removed in small, painful steps, with the approval of people who called the result beautiful. The red hair came next. The dark-haired Margarita was moved toward the red-haired Rita the public would remember. That color became part of the product. It made her stand out. It made the face warmer, brighter, more memorable. It helped create the version of Rita Hayworth Columbia could sell. But every change carried the same message. The woman as she existed was not enough. She had to be corrected before she could be valuable. The studio did not say it in those words. It did not need to. The chair said it. The dye said it. The new name said it. The photographs said it. The publicity department said it. The message was simple. Margarita Cansino was raw material. Rita Hayworth was the finished product. Edward Judson understood the value of that product. Accounts of their marriage describe control over her career and money. He helped move her toward better visibility in Hollywood, but help and ownership can look very similar when the person being helped has no real freedom. He pushed, managed, and benefited. Margarita had left her father's direct control, but the basic shape of her life had not changed enough. A man still stood between her and her own future. Columbia Pictures then became the larger cage. Harry Cohn, the head of the studio, ran Columbia with a hard hand and a mean temper. He was not a gentle guardian of talent. He was a boss who understood fear. Rita became the studio's most valuable female star, and Cohn treated value as a reason for control. If she made money, he wanted access. If she resisted, he could punish. If she became too independent, he could remind her who signed the checks. Later accounts describe Cohn keeping close watch over Rita, including reports of people around her who informed the studio about her movements and private life. Whether every detail is remembered exactly, the pattern fits the old studio system. Stars were not allowed to fully belong to themselves. Their dates, marriages, diets, publicity, photographs, and moods could become studio business. Rita's image was not just her image. It was Columbia's investment. Cohn wanted more than professional control. Accounts of his behavior toward Rita describe a man who was crude, aggressive, and furious when she did not give him what he wanted. Rita refused him. That refusal was dangerous because Cohn did not handle rejection as a private matter. He had a studio behind him. He had contracts. He had sets full of employees who knew better than to challenge him. He could make a working day feel like punishment. Public humiliation became part of the pressure. Cohn could insult her, shout, and make her feel small in front of people who depended on his approval. Rita had already spent years learning to survive powerful men. Cohn gave that old lesson a corporate office. He did not need chains. He had payroll. He had publicity. He had the power to decide which woman the public would see and which woman would be hidden. Even Rita's voice was not fully hers on screen. In several musical performances, her singing was dubbed. That was common in old Hollywood, but in Rita's case, it fit a larger truth. The studio sold a complete fantasy assembled from pieces. Her name was changed. Her hairline was changed. Her hair was changed. Her voice could be replaced. Her public story could be shaped. The audience saw one seamless woman. Behind the scenes, the studio had built her like a product on a table. Then came Gilda. In 1946, Rita Hayworth appeared in Gilda, and the image took over the world. The black dress, the hair, the glove, the look, the slow confidence of the entrance. It became one of the most famous star moments in film history. On screen, Gilda looked like a woman in command. She looked like she knew exactly what men wanted and exactly how to make them wait for it. She looked dangerous, amused, untouchable. That was the lie that worked too well. Gilda looked powerful. Rita was still being controlled. Columbia sold her as the love goddess. The phrase sounded like praise, but it was also a trap. A goddess does not get to be tired. A goddess does not get to be shy. A goddess does not get to be confused, hurt, or ordinary. Once the public accepted the label, Rita was expected to carry it everywhere. The woman who wanted privacy had to live inside an image built for strangers. People did not just admire Gilda. They believed in her. Men wanted the woman from the poster. They wanted the woman who pulled off the glove. They wanted the woman who seemed to own the room. Rita later became associated with the painful idea that men went to bed with Gilda and woke up with her. The wording has been repeated in different ways, but the meaning is clear. The fantasy created expectations the real woman could not meet and should never have been asked to meet. This is what Hollywood does when it succeeds too completely. It makes the character stronger than the person. It makes the poster louder than the voice of the human being underneath. Rita could stand in front of the world, but the world kept looking for Gilda. The cruel part was that Rita did not even behave like the woman the studio sold. People who knew her often described her as shy, soft-spoken, and unsure of herself. She was not the hard, fearless woman from the poster. She was a woman who had been trained since childhood to perform what other people demanded. That made the Gilda image even more punishing. The public was not just admiring her. It was asking her to become someone she was not. Every interview, every photograph, every public appearance pushed the same lie a little deeper. Smile like Gilda. Stand like Gilda. Let the room believe Gilda is real. If Rita looked tired, the fantasy cracked. If she seemed nervous, the fantasy cracked. So she kept giving people the version they had paid to see, even when that version had almost nothing to do with her real life. The problem with Gilda was not only that people desired her, it was that they thought desire gave them the right to define her. Rita could walk into a lobby, a restaurant, or a studio office and feel the room make a decision before she spoke. Men did not ask who she was that day. They looked for the woman from the screen. If she was quiet, they read mystery. If she pulled back, they read arrogance. If she seemed sad, they called it mood. The real person kept being translated into the fantasy because the fantasy was easier for everyone else to handle. That kind of pressure does not need one dramatic scene to do damage. It works through small moments. A stranger staring too long, a reporter asking the same question, a photographer waiting for the right angle, a studio man reminding her that millions of people wanted the image. Rita was surrounded by attention, but attention is not care. Attention watches. Care notices when someone is disappearing. And almost nobody around her was paid to notice Margarita. They were paid to keep Rita Hayworth alive. The Gilda image traveled into one of the strangest and ugliest moments of her public life. During the atomic tests at Bikini Atoll, the Able test bomb was nicknamed Gilda, and an image of Rita was attached to it. The public treated it as a shocking joke. Soldiers and newspapers understood the connection between the bombshell actress and the bomb. But beneath the joke was something colder. Rita's manufactured sexuality had been attached to a weapon. Her image had been taken out of her hands again. Accounts say Rita was angry when she learned about it. That anger was not vanity, it was recognition. Her face had been used without her real control. Columbia could enjoy the publicity. The military could enjoy the symbol. The public could enjoy the headline. Rita had to live with the fact that her body, already treated like studio property, could now be pasted onto a bomb and sent into history as someone else's joke. The studio had built a woman who was useful even when she was absent. That is when ownership becomes hardest to see. Rita did not have to be in the room for her image to work. The product could travel without the person. The product could sell without consent. The product could decorate a bomb. Orson Welles entered her life with a different kind of power. He was not a studio boss like Cohn, and he was not a promoter like Judson. He was a genius, a director, a performer, a political talker, a man with big ideas and a bigger sense of himself. Rita married him in 1943. For a while, he seemed like a way into a different world. He was educated, bold, funny, and outside the usual Hollywood mold. To a woman who had been managed and watched, that kind of man could look like freedom. But control does not always arrive with the same face. Welles did not need to tell Rita to change her body to fit the market. He could make her feel she needed to change her mind to fit him. He brought books, politics, intellectual circles, and expectations. He wanted a woman who could live in his world and reflect his brilliance. That might sound better than studio control, but it still put Rita in a familiar position. A man stood in front of her with a version of who she should become. She had been told her name was wrong, her hairline was wrong, her body was wrong. Now she could be made to feel her mind was not enough either. That is a quiet kind of damage. It does not leave a mark a camera can see. It works in the pauses after dinner, in the rooms where people use words as weapons, In the moment, a woman realizes she is being improved again by someone who claims to love her. In The Lady from Shanghai, Wells made the change visible. Rita's famous red hair was cut and bleached blonde for the role. Columbia was furious because the red hair was part of the product they had spent years building. But for Rita, the deeper issue was personal. Once again, a man with authority decided what should happen to the image on his head. The studio had made the red hair. Wells changed it for his film. Two sides fought over the same surface, and the surface was her body. The film is admired today, but the personal cost should not be ignored. Rita had finally become globally recognizable, and then the man closest to her changed the very thing that helped the public identify her. Wells may have seen it as art. Columbia saw it as damage to a brand. Rita was caught between both readings. The person underneath was asked once again to sit still while men decided what her appearance meant. The marriage did not last. Wells had his own ambitions, absences, and betrayals. Rita had wanted safety and found another complicated man who could not give her the simple care she needed. That became a pattern. Men were drawn to the image, then disappointed by the human being. Or they wanted to rescue her, then tried to reshape her. Or they wanted her fame, then resented the pain that came with it. After Wells, Rita looked beyond Hollywood. Prince Ali Khan offered a world that looked bigger than Columbia, bigger than Cohn, bigger than the studio gates. Their marriage in 1949 created the kind of public story newspapers loved. A movie star marrying a prince. Photographs of travel, parties, jewels, yachts, and old money. It looked like escape. It was not that simple. A royal title did not remove control. It changed the setting. Rita entered another world where image mattered, where appearances were watched, where a woman could become a trophy in a different kind of display case. Ali Khan was charming, wealthy, and internationally known. But charm and money are not the same as protection. Rita had already learned that expensive rooms could still be unsafe. Their daughter, Yasmin, gave Rita something the studio had not created. Motherhood was not a role assigned by Columbia. It was not a poster line. It was not a studio costume. Yasmin was real. That mattered because so much of Rita's life had been handled by people trying to turn her into something useful. Her daughter gave her a bond that did not begin as a business plan. When the marriage began to break down, the question of Yasmin became the center. Custody, religion, money, and international power all pressed against Rita. Accounts of the divorce describe serious negotiations and large financial offers tied to the child's future. The exact terms have been told in different ways, but the basic truth is clear. Rita had to fight powerful people for the right to keep her daughter close and raise her outside a system that could swallow them both. This is one of the few places in her story where the old training cracked. Rita had spent much of her life adapting to men with more power. But when Yasmin was involved, she resisted harder. She had not always been able to protect herself. She fought to protect her child. That difference is important. It shows that Rita was not weak. She had been worn down by years of control. When the line became her daughter, she found force that Hollywood had not managed to erase. The fight cost her. Money drained away. Stability moved farther out of reach. She had escaped one system only to be pulled back into another. Legal bills, public scrutiny, unreliable men, and the need to keep working. Hollywood did not stop using a woman because she was tired. It waited for her to need money. In 1953, she married singer Dick Haymes. By then, she was exhausted and vulnerable. Haymes had serious tax and immigration problems. Rita's fame became useful to him. Reports describe financial pressure and the loss of money through that marriage. She was no longer only a star to be desired. She was a resource to be tapped. Fame can look like power from the outside. Inside a marriage with the wrong person, it can become another thing someone uses against you. One public incident made the humiliation impossible to hide. Haymes reportedly struck Rita at the Coconut Grove nightclub. The details were reported, repeated, and absorbed into the long public story of her unhappy private life. But the meaning should not be reduced to gossip. The most desired woman in the world could be hurt in a public room, and the world still did not know how to protect her. It knew how to stare. It knew how to print. It knew how to turn pain into a story. Protection was another matter. Her fifth marriage, to producer James Hill in 1958, brought another version of the same old pattern. Hill was tied to work. He wanted productivity. Accounts describe harsh treatment, public humiliation, and pressure to keep acting in projects that did not serve her well. By then, Rita was no longer the fresh Columbia miracle. She was older, tired, and still expected to make money. Hollywood likes to pretend it loves its legends. Often it loves them most when they are still profitable. This is where the cruelty of the star system becomes plain. It spends years making a woman unnatural, then punishes her when she cannot live naturally. It builds a face, a body, a fantasy, a label, and a public appetite. Then, when the person begins to show age, illness, damage, fear, or fatigue, the system calls her difficult. The same machine that created the pressure acts, surprised when the pressure leaves marks. Glenn Ford remained one of the more complicated and lasting figures in Rita's life. They made several films together, and their chemistry on screen became part of Hollywood memory. Their private connection has been described in different ways, but Ford stayed linked to her across decades, not just through one publicity season. In a life crowded by men who managed, sold, used, or reshaped her, a steady presence mattered. That does not mean he was a perfect savior. The Rita Hayworth story does not need a perfect savior. It needs the truth that she was often surrounded by people who wanted something from her. A person who could simply sit near her without demanding Gilda was already different from the men who mistook the poster for the woman. Rita did not need another man to worship the image. She needed someone to recognize that the image was heavy. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, signs of memory trouble became harder to dismiss. At first, people could explain it away. Stress, drinking, nerves, exhaustion. The film business is very good at cheap explanations, especially for women. If a woman forgets a line, she is unreliable. If she looks confused, she is a problem. If she arrives late, she is difficult. The industry rarely asks whether something deeper is happening until the person can no longer be used. Rita was developing Alzheimer's disease, but the diagnosis was not clearly understood at first. The public story became alcohol. That label stuck because it was easy. It fit the fallen star narrative. It gave tabloids a simple headline. It let the industry avoid asking what had been done to her and what was medically happening inside her brain. On the set of The Wrath of God in the early 1970s, the problem became harder to hide. Lines had to be broken down. Scenes had to be handled carefully. Rita, once a performer with exact timing and years of discipline behind her, struggled to remember basic dialogue. That kind of loss cuts deeply for an actor. Memory is not a side tool. It is part of the job. When memory begins to fail, the actor is left exposed in front of everyone. Director, crew, camera, silence. The crew may not have understood what they were watching. Many people did not. The disease was there before the public had a useful language for it. So the old labels did the work. Drinking, decline, trouble, fallen goddess. The words were wrong, but they were profitable. In 1976, an incident at Heathrow Airport turned Rita's illness into public spectacle. She appeared disoriented and distressed after a flight. Photographers and reporters closed in. The images and stories fed the old narrative. The press did not see a woman with a serious brain disease. It saw a headline. It saw the collapse of a beauty icon. It saw another way to make money from a woman whose image had already made money for everyone else. This was one of the final insults. For decades, men had controlled her body from the outside. Now illness was taking control from the inside, and the public still blamed her character. They did not say, something is medically wrong. They said, she fell apart. They did not ask who was caring for her. They asked what happened to the beauty they remembered. That question was cruel, because the beauty had always been easier for them to love than the woman. Rita had given the public an image that never aged, never forgot, never stumbled through an airport, never lost a sentence halfway through. But the real woman aged. The real woman got sick. The real woman needed patience. Hollywood had trained the audience to want the image, then punished her when she could no longer match it. That is how celebrity coverage keeps making money. First, the press sells perfection. Then it sells the failure to remain perfect. The same face that once sold desire can later sell pity, mockery, and shock. The person inside the face gets less protection in both versions. By the early 1980s, Rita's condition was finally understood as Alzheimer's disease, and her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, helped bring that truth into public view. That announcement changed the story. It did not erase years of false assumptions, but it gave the public a medical truth. Rita had not simply become the tabloid version of herself. She was ill. She had been ill. Many of the behaviors mocked in public had been symptoms of a disease that people around her had failed to understand. Yasmin became her mother's protector. That was one of the few clean turns in her story. The daughter Rita had fought to keep became the person who fought for Rita. Yasmin helped move the public conversation away from shame and toward awareness. She used her mother's famous name to raise money and attention for Alzheimer's research. Through the Rita Hayworth Gala and related efforts, that name became connected to medical advocacy, not just Hollywood fantasy. There is something hard and decent in that reversal. Columbia used Rita's image to sell movies. Magazines used it to sell copies. Men used it to sell themselves. The military used it as a symbol. Later, Yasmin used the name to help people understand a disease. For once, the image served care instead of consumption. Rita Hayworth died in 1987. She was 68 years old. By then, Gilda had already become permanent. The film still played. The photographs still looked young. The red hair still burned in public memory. The glove still slipped down the arm. But the woman who carried all of that had lived a much harder life than the image suggested. Reportedly, Glenn Ford was among the men who stood in honor near her casket. That detail does not need heavy language. It is simple enough. A man who had shared the screen history helped carry the real woman at the end. No studio lighting, no retake, no publicity department controlling the frame. Just weight, wood, sunlight, and a body that no studio could use anymore. What Hollywood protected was not always the person. More often, it protected the product, the profit, and the illusion the public had paid to believe. Rita Hayworth was sold as the love goddess, but Margarita Cansino was the one who paid the bill. The studio could change her name, it could move her hairline, it could dye her hair, it could dub her voice, it could watch her dressing room. It could place her face on posters, bombs, magazines, and marquees. But it could not fully erase the truth. A person was under all of it. The old studio system sold stars as if they appeared naturally. Rita Hayworth proved stars were also manufactured. Sometimes with contracts, sometimes with needles, sometimes with hunger, sometimes with silence. The public saw Polish because the studio hid the process. The finished image looked clean because the pain was kept off camera. The hardest part of Rita Hayworth's story is that none of this erased her talent. She was not powerful because she suffered. She was powerful because she knew how to make a song, a look, or a movement feel alive. She could hold still and make a frame tighten around her. She could dance with discipline that had been forced into her work long before Hollywood knew her name. She could make an audience believe in a woman who seemed fearless, even when fear had followed her since childhood. That is the real theft. Not just the name, not just the hairline, not just the image. The theft was that Hollywood took a gifted person and made her believe the gift mattered more than the person carrying it. Modern entertainment likes to believe it is different. In some ways, it is. Contracts have changed. Public language has changed. Performers can speak directly now. But the old question has not disappeared. When a young performer becomes profitable, who protects the person from the product? A weigh-in can become a fitness clause. A gossip column can become a viral post. A studio contract can become a brand deal. The language changes. The pressure can stay the same. The public got Gilda. Columbia got a fortune. The world got Rita Hayworth. Margarita Cansino got a life spent trying to survive what other people built around her. She was not only a victim, she was not only a fantasy. She was not only a tragic headline, she was a worker, a mother, a dancer, an actress, and a woman whose real face kept being covered by the faces men wanted to sell. So when the black glove slips down the arm, the question should not be whether the image is beautiful. It is beautiful. The question is what had to happen before the camera rolled. Who decided the girl from the Dancing Cansinos was not marketable enough as herself? Who sat her in the chair while the needle touched her skin? Who watched the money rise while the person underneath got smaller? Who kept calling it glamour because glamour was easier to sell than control? You are watching Hollywood Dark Secrets. If you want to understand how this system truly operates, subscribe to the channel. We are building a ledger they cannot erase, and we need you watching closely because the studio story was never the whole story.